Welcome, everyone, to Data Tools for Everyone, Connecting Strategy, Practice, and Impact. It's a fall 2025 webinar series in partnership with DataKind and Data for Social Impact. I'm Dan Ferris. I'm an associate professor of practice at the Brown School at WashU in St. Louis and co-director of policy, education, and practice at the Center for Social Development. I'm thrilled and honored and humbled to be here with an incredible partner, colleague, and co-speaker today, Shayna Lee, who's the Senior Director of US Communities at DataKind. So as folks are continuing to join us and introduce themselves in the chat, I can share a little bit about who all is here with us. So we've had just an incredible response, almost 350 registrations from colleagues with the top three types of organizations represented being NGOs and nonprofits, academic institutions, and local and state government colleagues. So geographically, while there is robust representation from the St. Louis region, of course, we also span multiple regions, time zones, countries, and continents. So whether it's 10 a.m. where you're joining from or 10 p.m., thank you truly for being here. Health, education, housing, poverty, economic resilience, the areas that people in attendance today are working on and around are complex and critical. Strengthening connectivity as well as capacity is core to our shared values, and we're truly energized to be learning here together. About 1/3 of registrants shared that working with data is their primary role. Most of us here fall under the category of data informs our work, while not the primary focus, and a very special heartfelt welcome to the folks who in the registration brief survey identified with a statement that they have little or no day-to-day interaction with data. Equitable data practice includes everyone, and bringing together different roles and positions is critical to our shared work. So with that introduced, I'll invite Shayna to launch our first anonymous poll around collaboration for us to answer and queue up the content still to come.
So hopefully you all can see the poll that we just launched. This is a question we're curious about, collaboration around data. Thanks so much, everyone, already jumping in to share your thoughts. This is an anonymous poll, so we just want to get a sense of who do you collaborate with around data, and you're welcome to check all that apply. We've got within your own team, across departments at your organization, across other organizations or sectors, among community members, or if you're not sure, that's okay too. That's why we're coming here together to discuss. So let's see, we've got, give it a few more seconds. We're at 85% that are responding, which is great. We'll wait for it to slow down a little bit. Okay, I think we're in a good space with just about 90% sharing their thoughts around collaboration. So let's see, we'll share the results of that. So you can see definitely there's collaboration happening within your respective teams, across your departments, across other organizations. So really great to see. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts. We'll have a couple other polls along the way, but thanks so much for at least kicking us off with sharing your thoughts. Dan, back to you.
Absolutely. Always great to get a snapshot of who's in the room, how people are entering, and most importantly, where we're heading together. So speaking of where we're heading together, a quick snapshot of the agenda. We'll be introducing briefly Data for Social Impact and DataKind, offering 4 lessons learned from using data and technology for social impact, and then going through from problem to asset, introducing and reviewing techniques and methods for really looking at problem statements and then mapping technique. So the social sector plays an incredible role in the rapidly changing fields of data and data science, shaping ideas of working collaboratively and recognizing assets, as well as the needs or problems to be addressed. So we know that building data capacity can help social sector organizations advance their mission and promote equitable outcomes, that a collaborative, asset-based approach can reveal unique strengths as well as challenges, and that leveraging data for social impact is as much about process and translation skills as it is about technical skills. So founded with support from the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, Data for Social Impact is based out of the Center for Social Development at the Brown School at Washington University in St. Louis, in close partnership with the Community Innovation and Action Center at the University of Missouri St. Louis. DSI builds connectivity and capacity for organizations working to increase impact for and with the communities they serve. DSI's work is guided by a set of core values developed through consultation with numerous organizations in St. Louis and beyond, public roundtables, and engagement with an incredible advisory committee, some members of whom are here with us today. This has informed our core values, which we work to translate into our activities. Events and programming, a lot like the offering here and series here with DataKind, resource development and dissemination, consultative support for organizations, and learning cohorts. So today, tool adoption is both an amazing opportunity and for many can present a range of challenges across the data lifecycle. So through this series, we specifically hope to support organizations in the St. Louis area and beyond in adopting and implementing digital tools that strengthen programs at the community level, showcase how data can be leveraged to build capacity and connectivity for increasing impact, and meet people where they are across a wide range of roles, organizations, and levels of experience. We do this through featuring both foundational introductions and more hands-on applications and practice opportunities. So speaking of those opportunities through the larger series, today we're thrilled to be kicking off with our first offering. And as we advance, have designed the sessions to continue to connect colleagues with all different levels of familiarity and experience. In our next sessions, we'll be exploring a free DataKind developed tool, Ladder, going deeper with supported hands-on practice opportunities, and then culminating with a virtual roundtable to give the community that is forming through the series an opportunity to engage further with a variety of leaders and practitioners, incorporating data tools and values into their organizations and work, and also as a chance to look ahead to what comes next. So a true exclamation point at the end of our series together. In addition to Shayna, who's joining us today, I'd very much love to acknowledge and thank Dave Perry, Rachel Wells, Caitlin Augustine from DataKind, colleagues from the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, and the Data for Social Impact Advisory and DSI STL steering committees for helping to shape both the series and DSI offerings and engagements more broadly. So just a few very quick items as we get started. In addition to dedicated time later on in the session for discussion and Q&A, you can use the Q&A function on your Zoom screen, which is either a button on your toolbar or, for me at least, hidden underneath the more toggle in our Zoom toolbars. Please ask questions and engage with the content throughout. We'll do our best to continue to engage and incorporate. You may have noticed logging in that we are using a Zoom meeting platform rather than a webinar. So we'll leave microphones muted during the presentation just to prevent against an accidental interruption, a dog barking, a doorbell ringing, a phone call happening, whatever it might be. But then when we get to the Q&A, we'll definitely look forward to people coming off mute and engaging with the session. The event recording and materials should be circulating later this week in a follow-up email, and we'll also post to the event page. And then please do continue to join us and share with your colleagues and networks about the series in the weeks and months ahead. This is, again, the first of 4 virtual offerings as part of the series, and we're thrilled by the initial response that the series has received and truly grateful for everyone taking time to learn and connect with us. With that, I will turn things over to Shayna, invite Shayna to share her screen, and I look forward to the session to come.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. Okay, as we transition, Dan, I'm going to ask you to keep me honest if you can see my screen in full mode. No
Slides look
speaker
great.
notes. Okay, great. No speaker notes. Okay, perfect. We always have to, rule out the checks and balances as we go through this webinar. Again, thanks so much for joining us today. Really excited to talk with you a little bit about moving from problems to assets, the theme of this webinar. But you're probably curious if you haven't heard about DataKind, just wanted to share a little bit about the organization. We empower mission-driven organizations with innovative, scalable solutions to maximize impact, streamline operations, and optimize resources in support of the communities that our social impact organizations serve. And at DataKind, we believe in the power of collaboration really to unlock the full potential of data science and AI within social impact. For us, success at DataKind is when we've created or co created data driven solutions that are essentially adopted widely and contribute positively to those sector level problems. We do this through three key ways. So, we do this through ecosystem leadership. We conduct research, opportunity analysis to identify the pain points that a sector may be experiencing and what those promising approaches are for building solutions. We do a little bit of capacity building. So we work to empower organizations using data science and AI. So that way, those organizations can act with greater insight and confidence. And then through technical partnerships, we work with partners to design ethical, relevant, and scalable tools and products in partnership with social impact organizations. With that in mind, here are some of our design principles that we always take under consideration and do within our support technical solutions. So you see here human-centered with ethics, equity, and fairness prioritized from the beginning. We want our solutions to be actionable, making sure that they're providing accessible and interpretable insights. Cost efficient, we all know we keep that in mind. And so a part of being cost efficient is key in the social impact sector. So we think a lot when we develop our tools about sustainability in ways that reduce operating and environmental costs. And also building trust is paramount. We do this through secure by design practices, co-collaboration with our social sector partners, and ensuring that within those products or solutions that we have a human in the loop embedded within that solution. You can see here quickly, since our founding 13 years ago, our reach has found impact domestically and globally. We've partnered with over 130 partners related to solutions that support community well-being. And overall, we've worked on over 450 projects with 35 countries using our software solutions. We also have our amazing grassroots volunteers that also support and generating rapid insights. And we do that through a variety of events as well. So that's a little bit about DataKind. Would love to dive right in just to kind of highlight some lessons learned throughout our history, sharing four lessons that really just have been very impactful when it comes to data for social impact. And talking through those. And right off the bat, the first one is around solving the right problem. It's very interesting. We often find finding problems or defining those specific problems can be just as hard, if not harder, than figuring out what the solution is. At DataKind, we've experienced many instances of where this has come up. And so we really put a lot of effort and conversation with our partners around ensuring that we're shaping a data solution for social impact, but doing so from the point of first defining the problem well before jumping into that solution process. The second lesson is around planning for solution and sustainability from the start. I alluded to this earlier as well. So we think about a lot of things with our partners in terms of, for instance, how the tool or solution is embedded within one's user workflow. We also think about reducing operating and environmental costs, as mentioned earlier. And we also think on other things like data infrastructure, governance, interoperability to ensure solutions are able to make use of information and exchange that properly. Some of you probably can resonate with this photo that comes up where oftentimes there's a solution that comes in place. Then there's this modern upgrade or infrastructure that happens. And then it's, well, what happened to the tool that was initially built? So thinking through all of those elements from a sustainability standpoint. Also, just as important for DataKind is meeting users where they are. It's not enough to just create this fantastic, complex solution. We really want to consider the ability for those technical and non technical alike to be able to utilize our tools, minimizing the barriers for someone that's engaging with our tool. And again, where it ultimately provides insight that drives toward action. So, as an example of a couple of tools that DataKind has done with this in mind, we've partnered with the New America Future of Land and Housing program, as well as with some statewide collaborators in Indiana, Arizona, and Florida to create this tool called FEAT, our foreclosure and eviction analysis tool. And so, when we were thinking about how we can design this solution, we built with this in mind and based on feedback from our partners, bearing in mind things such as not having a code interface, single sign on, the ability to drag and drop, having an activity dashboard saved with analysis, visualizations, etc. And we'll be sure to share after this call, just as a quick note, links to these products and tools so you're able to see them. But that's an example of where we thought about that. Another example is a tool that we're actually going to be highlighting more in depth through this webinar series. So stay tuned. This is a tool that we've created recently called Ladder. It's a platform designed to make community data accessible and actionable. And so Ladder really is designed with the idea of enabling service providers, practitioners, policymakers, and community stakeholders through a teaming function to be able to access and share standardized public data and also have the flexibility to combine with your own data to create mapping analysis. This is already in use across organizations within health and housing. Again, we're excited to be able to share more about this tool, but this is just a screenshot of the tool in action, looking at housing and security overlaid with SNAP retailer locations, just as an example. So be make sure to join our future webinars to see more of a deep dive there. And then the last lesson is recognizing that digital tools often can take many shapes. There's always that tendency to want to jump to the most exciting solution or want to think through that. But I think it's also helpful. And in our experience, we've realized that those tools can take many shapes. They can be simple tools in some cases. And what's just as important is the process, again, defining the problem well, co-creating with your users to be able to move towards a solution. So, in this next section, we are going to now get into talking about problem statements and asset mapping as well. So, before doing that, I'd love to get your thoughts again on another poll. Making no assumptions as you look at this screen. Again, making no assumptions that one side is better than the other. We want to get a sense of how you characterize your work on this continuum based on your context. So, I am going to go ahead and launch the poll. Dan, again, keep me honest to make sure everything comes up correctly. All right. Great. So your choices are if you're mostly assets or strength-based focused, somewhat asset focused, maybe you're equally focused on assets and needs, somewhat needs focused, or if you're mostly needs focused. This is not a right or wrong answer. This is just to get a sense of the context in which you work from. And these responses will be anonymous. We'll share the overall results, but anonymous responses there. So we'll share those results. We're at 75%, heading towards 80% of respondents. This is great. Thanks so much. We'll wait a few more seconds to see how we're all showing up across the continuum of needs and assets focus. All right. So we'll go ahead. It looks like things are slowing down. We'll end the poll in share the results for you all to see. It looks like the majority of us are equally focused on assets and needs within our work, followed closely by mostly needs focus. That is absolutely relevant depending on an organization that you're coming from, somewhat needs focused. So thanks so much for sharing your thoughts there, just to get a sense of how we're coming into thinking about problems and asset mapping. All right, great. We will continue on. So, here's a very simple project or problem statement template that we like to use often across our partnerships, and we're really excited to be able to share that. And we'll spend the rest of our time returning to this statement as we go through what each portion means to be able to encourage thinking about what your respective problem statement could look like in alignment with asset mapping. So, one would think that you would want to start from the top. This is a bit of a unique problem statement in that we actually want to start at the end with the impact that you're trying to achieve. This is helpful in ensuring that when you're looking at the impact, you're really addressing those problems and looking at it from that lens initially. You might be tempted right away to start with, well, let's jump to the data. What should I collect? Or I've got this type of data. What should I do next? But ultimately, if we want to address important challenges and help serve the good of those in the community that we're working to support, we want to start with identifying the problem to address. So that is where the so what lies with the impact. And if you're not clear on what that impact may look like, here's a couple of questions to kind of prompt and start with brainstorming. So, when you think about impact, you may want to ask yourself, well, what's your mission? What's your vision? Or what's the change that you want to see in the world? Another way that you can phrase it for some folks that may be more clear is what keeps you up at night? That may spur a response that may lend itself to how you think about defining impact. And what metric are you using to measure whether you're successful? Thinking through things like that. Next in the problem statement is thinking about the behavior change that you want to see. Now, this can be at an organizational, community, or individual level, depending on the impact that you're looking for. So ultimately, this part of the problem statement really looks at what change do you want to make that will end up leading to the impact that you're seeking. Next up, once you have some of those changes mapped out, it's actually time to jump to the top and decide what type of analysis do you want to do. We'll come back to the data last, but in this instance, it's really identifying or understanding a community need that you want to be able to look at analyzing, whether it's something like understanding housing needs or various other analysis that relates to the context that you're coming into with that. And then finally, since we never finished the rest of the piece, data, that comes last. We don't want to forget that, but recognizing that's the last piece of the puzzle there. So when we think about data, this is just a quick refresh of thinking through three primary ways in which data can be utilized. So data is very helpful because it can help us observe the state of the world to make sense and understand what's currently happening within our community. This could include, for example, understanding where disaster responses are happening, where populations live, when you're thinking about disease control, and so much more. In order to observe the state of the world, this is a case where we need to identify access and be able to work with trusted data sources. Now, when we've observed the state of the world through the observation lens, we can then use data to help us reason through it. So it could be, for example, what do we think will happen based on our initial observations? And in this case, data used in this way can help us anticipate outcomes and plan for what may happen next. And then third, once we've observed and then reasoned with the data, it can help us drive toward action. These decisions and insights that we can make to get closer to your goal. And in this case, this is where data can be utilized to propose solutions and identify opportunities, which then takes us back to the beginning of the circle of observing what that new state is. So just wanted to highlight that really quick. And when it comes to identifying and gathering data, it's always important to start with and review the data that you have access to. This can be internal organizational data sources, it can be open or public data sources. You can also consider overlooked data sources that you may not have necessarily thought of. If you're in a community grassroots organization, how often is it, which is great to work with community members as an example, that may be able to identify additional data sources to look at? And then data from partners that you may work with. So oftentimes when it comes to collecting data, we always like to look at what exists and is accessible first as a starting point so that it doesn't seem overwhelming in terms of, oh, I have to think of how to collect data right from the onset. It's looking at what already exists. These are also additional considerations when gathering or identifying data. So we often like to think through accuracy. Is the information correct? What is the margin of error or variability that is acceptable, for example? Looking at completeness, how comprehensive is the data? Who, what, all the W's, when, where does the data represent, especially when we're looking at our communities? Reliability, is the data from a reputable, trusted source? Is it accessible? Relevance. Do we need this information? That's always a good question. Oftentimes there's, a need to want to collect and gather, but there's also what's helpful in thinking about, do we really need this data for this specific need? Kind of going through that due diligence. Does it inform your analysis and help answer questions? And then timeliness, thinking about how current is the data source and whether it can be utilized for real-time reporting, or is it helpful more from an overtime or trend perspective? Now that we've looked at those elements there, I wanted to talk a little bit about asset mapping before we get back to our problem statement. Asset mapping really is a great process for identifying and mapping assets within a community that can also be in the form of data as well. They are ultimately things that are important to a respective community. These can be people, things, services, resources, and so much more. They can be physical or intangible things, areas that you see here on the screen, assets that fall under government, built infrastructure, natural resources, financial, culture, and social networks. So there's a variety of ways, but all of that lends itself to assets and strengths identified within a community. And so when it comes to asset identification and mapping at your organization, you may already have your community identified. For example, I used to work at a cancer fighting organization. So for us, the information we had already was really centered around our cancer patients and caregivers, and thinking about defining that community for our organization. Define what you want to do with the information collected. And so, certain prompts that can help you think about that is thinking through friction points you may have in the information to do your work, what information would enhance, and what's a new idea that you want to test. And then selecting the assets that you're interested in, going back to that earlier slide, thinking through all the various ways one can identify assets. and then gathering that information. So similar to what was mentioned earlier, identifying assets, thinking about what you may already have internally through other teams, public data sources, etc. So I said a lot around problem statements, asset mapping. With that said, how does that then relate? So, wanted to share with you now that we've talked through that, to share an example coming back to this problem statement and creating what one could look like. So, here's an example that I have here around food security. So, you can see here the impact. Well, I'll read the whole statement. So, in this case, we want to better understand hunger needs within our community using available data on food bank, that's a typo, sorry, food bank locations, community chronic disease diagnosis, and community indicators. So, looking at that analysis and data point so that this organization can bring additional free mobile food banks to their community to ensure access to healthy foods so that this organization can reduce hunger within one's community. So that's a tangible example of how you can think about all the components that I highlighted within a problem statement and asset mapping. You can see in this case, the asset was looking at the resource of food bank locations and thinking through that alongside looking at indicators around those areas where there are community members that have chronic disease diagnosis or economic indicators. So, with that said, we'd love to give you the chance to practice through quiet reflection. Have no fear, you do not need to share your problem statement unless you want to, but we really want to give you space to think about what this could look like within your context and draft. We're not looking for perfection here. This is really just a chance to think about what you just heard and have some quiet reflection. So, we're going to give a couple of minutes of quiet time. I have my timer here. You can jot on the side of your paper what you think a sample problem statement could be for your work and your organization. And after that time, if someone would like to share it in the chat, you're welcome to. So, with that said, we'll go ahead and give you all that 2 minutes of reflection to fill in the blanks of a problem statement that you see here. Okay, 2 minutes went by pretty fast, but no worries. Again, this is just to have a moment to reflect and think about what a problem statement could look like. I want to quickly acknowledge a point Dan made earlier. If you have any questions, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I already saw a great question that came in that we'll definitely get to. But just as a friendly reminder, you can utilize that if you'd like to ask a question, and you can also upvote on a question that's been asked as well. So if there's anyone that is interested in wanting to share what they came up with, would welcome you to put that in the chat. I think we can also, let's see, we can unmute, right, Dan, if needed, if someone wants to come off mute. Great. So I will bring that setting up if someone would like to come off mute and share their draft problem statement or put it in the chat. We'll give a minute for folks that want to do that. And I'll also go back to this slide so you see the example here to reference. Okay, anyone brave enough to share any initial thoughts coming off mute or putting it into the chat?
You did just give one in the chat in case it didn't prompt a notification on your side, Shayna.
Thank you so much. Thanks for highlighting that. Thanks, Lex, for sharing your thoughts. It looks like we see a couple folks coming in with some good problem statements here. Lex, thanks so much for sharing. Wanting to build youth social capital using the strong youth adult relationships in our community so that young people can access opportunities, experiences, and social networks to empower them so that they can achieve success and thrive. Really appreciate that's a very thorough problem statement there. So really appreciate you sharing that. That's a good one, thinking about youth engagement. There's another one coming in around wanting to understand how universities can sustainably address student food, housing, and financial insecurity using institutional data that Devon, you listed some great data sources and thinking about how to take a look at that. So we can develop a replicable blueprint that universities can use to design and strengthen. So there's a little bit of scale within that there as well, so that institutions can ensure long-term stability for students, reduce financial crises, and contribute to reducing extreme economic inequality. Thanks so much, Devon, for highlighting your problem statement. I like the bullet points too. That always keeps me honest to make sure I addressed each part. Ethan, thanks so much for sharing. You have a statement around providing doula support to birthing moms and families in St. Louis using data from doula organizations on outcomes and touch points with moms and families. Ultimately, so that you all can show the impact of program and more grant money to expand reach. That is a real thing. So appreciate you highlighting that need as well, Ethan. Great thoughts there. Identifying family, thanks so much. Wanting to identify pre-diabetes related social determinants of health factors among youth in St. Louis City specifically, using SDOH survey data so that you can develop tailored interventions based on modifiable factors so that you can reduce the onset of prediabetes in youth. These are great. Keep thinking those through. Again, that's such a great way to think about identifying your problems and assets hand in hand. And again, that can be something that is done in collaboration if you're working with other organizations on a shared challenge or even within your organization as well. And we'll provide a resource so you have this template as well. Okay, great. In this next section, we're going to ask you one more time for some feedback because, again, you heard a lot of great information. You had the chance to have some quiet reflection. And so, we always want to make sure, recognizing that this is a series, that we're delivering information that's relevant to your needs. So, we'd love to get your thoughts on the knowledge of today's topic. So we just want to get a pulse check. Again, this is anonymous. Has the knowledge of this event changed? Has it increased? Is it about the same? Or you're not sure? There's no right or wrong answers. This is really just to get an understanding of those coming to our webinar today so we can continue to refine our future webinars coming up. So we'll give it a couple of seconds for folks to share their thoughts. Again, as always, anonymous, but this will be helpful so we can make sure that we keep designing the subsequent webinars in the series in a way that's meaningful for your needs. All right, we're approaching just about 80%. Give it a couple more seconds for folks to weigh in on how they feel about what they just heard today. Okay, we're right at 83%. And we're going to go ahead and share. The majority of you feel that your knowledge has increased as a result of today's event. We're glad to hear that. No, it's about the same. We're glad to hear that too. If you're aware of some of this, this is great news as well. And some of you are not sure, and that's okay as well. We're going to share information about additional resources and how you can contact us for any questions. And then the last poll that we have is, how likely are you to incorporate what you've learned today within your work? Is it relevant? That's one of the things, going back to data, relevant information. We want to get a sense of if this is something that you foresee being incorporated in your work. So we'll give a few seconds for that. And then coming up next, we're going to have time for Q&A. So again, feel free to put any questions you have in the Q&A icon at the bottom, and we'll allow folks also to come off mute if there's questions you have. Okay, we're right around close to 80%, so we'll share the results that many of you are very likely to incorporate what you learned today, and follow up, likely and extremely likely. So seeing quite a few that have indicated likelihood of incorporating today's content. So really appreciate that. And again, we want to continue to refine and have this build into the next webinar that we're going to be offering. So with that said, we'd love to hear any questions that you all have based on what you've heard today. Maybe a preview if you're interested about what's ahead. Any questions related to that? I am going to go into the Q&A. Let's see. There's a good question from Catherine, related to encountering stakeholders who have a clear problem statement, but have often never measured the impact. With no current state metric for their impact going on, it's challenging to find the desired impact. There's difficulty in connecting the dots with that impact. And so the question is essentially around, do you iterate with the stakeholder? Other advice? I'll answer, and then Dan, want to invite you to answer as well. In our partnerships, we absolutely do iterate. If there are not, well, first I'll say we will always ask the question of success metrics. If nothing else, just to get on the radar on the value of really trying to lean on what success looks like, even if that's something in the interim that shows up as a KPI, as an example. We want to make sure that those conversations are held and want to come back to that, particularly before we get too far down the road of a solution that's being developed. Because again, the hypothesis is we're designing and looking for solutions that can meet a problem. So definitely noted around the complexity around that. Dan, any other advice?
And I would just thank the participant for the great question and touching on such a common challenge in project and strategy work alike. Um, Often different invested parties articulating a problem or a symptom and jumping straight to the solution or desired impact. So some of the activities that I've used or we've used collectively in our work is clarifying between problems and symptoms, reframing, working backwards from desired impacts, co-creation of a baseline. That kind of iterative process, I think, really resonates in terms of, we have to start somewhere, and then thinking about iterating with hypotheses and not just metrics specifically, and the ways of knowing or the different kinds of data and what we're even including or considering to be data being really central in terms of building bridges and understanding between the different dynamics between a wide range of what I'm interpreting to be the different stakeholders that you're referencing here. And that iterative kind of collaborative process, I think, is really key. So thanks for the great question.
Yeah, great one indeed. There's another good question in the Q&A around disaggregated demographic data and wanting to provide public health, behavioral, and mental health services for immigrant communities, limit those that have limited English proficient speaking abilities in the Missouri area. And just thinking through ensuring that that data is present in data sets and dashboards. So apologies, Sal. It sounds like that's more of you're sharing your problem statement. Okay, now I'm understanding the context. This is great. So appreciate you sharing this. This I think is also an interesting example of what happens when perhaps you may not have a public data set that has that specific disaggregated demographic data set and how to mitigate and work with obtaining those data sources. So that's something that we'll actually highlight a little bit in our future webinar because the tool that we created latter, we hope will help mitigate that, especially recognizing that there may be organizations, social impact organizations, that track this data if it's not publicly available, and how to collaborate with those organizations perhaps to get that information. So appreciate the comment there. All right, great. Other questions or comments? Let me toggle back to the chat. Dan, did you also want to speak on that as well? Just want,
Yeah, I was just going to say, I see Sal, you have your hand raised. If you wanted to come off mute and just add a little context or any additional questions that are coming front of your mind.
Thanks, Dan and Shanna. I just wanted to apologize for the spelling. So,
no worries.
but thank you for bringing this up. But in this issue is much more complicated because it is an issue that has history. I think it has issues related to the overall environment, who's in charge, and I'll just leave it at that. So it has an issue. It's an issue that has many levels, from systems to government entities to health entities, and how data is reported. I don't think I've ever seen, for example, a state of the workforce report for the state of Missouri from any entity that included demographic data by race or ethnicity. It's just the future of our workforce. This is but it never talks about people. And so there's a disconnect. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sal.
Yeah, and
And
well said, Sal. Thinking through, you're right, the complexity of all of those challenges, collecting the data, even, folks that may consent into sharing information and how that all connects together. So absolutely recognizing those challenges there.
Yeah, I was just chiming briefly and just with gratitude, an additional problem statement or two have come through in the chat. And really kind of there's a really direct connection point from the earlier question about stakeholders or different invested parties and their interpretation of the problem and measuring impact and connections to what people are putting together. So just wanted to say thank you, Shayna, for helping to walk through this exercise, and DataKind for helping to conceptualize moving from problem to asset in such a helpful way. Whether it's thinking about a free after-school healthy snack program or pre-diabetes related social determinants of health among youth in St. Louis or beyond. These are complex issues and a great kind of engagement tool for thinking about that connection point between problem and impact, to be sure. With the time we've got left, any additional questions? We'll do another thorough scan of the Q&A and the chat just to be sure, but would welcome any additional questions that folks have.
There was one good one in the chat around balancing privacy concerns with obtaining personal data if we want to highlight. I think a couple of thoughts that come to my mind and happy to share more is I think that's where it's so important thinking about your organization's governance and privacy laws as a starting point. Earlier, I alluded to relevance. So, what is the data that we're actually trying to collect versus we're going to get all the data? Really have an interrogated conversation around what is the information that we really need and for what purpose? And then going to consent, how do you work with constituents to make that transparent as well as an opportunity for that person to opt out at any point? There's so much more I can go into that, but I'll just like at least start. Those are the beginnings. And again, we definitely work through that in collaborations. But Dan, any other remarks there? There's a lot.
Yeah, that's a robust and critical question, one that I fear that I can't really do justice to in a very brief Q&A segment. Just to echo Shayna's points, and again, we're really emphasizing process and translation and community centeredness. So the involvement of community and communities in our data practice and strategy underlying is really critical, both to broad data practice as well as this very specific question through data governance, data security, and then a host of different practices that we're happy to share some additional resources around when we send and post the recording and materials for folks, as there's some incredible experts and innovators doing some really important work at different levels around this really pertinent question. So thanks for that. And Emma, just acknowledging your hand up, and would love to invite you to come off mute just for another question or reflection.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Can y'all hear me? Okay, awesome. So I know, Dr. Ferris, that you work in like the food system and some, community type environments. And I put, in the chat the problem statement about the after school snack program. So I am currently like the person planning to go in and collect what data we can use to evaluate the effectiveness of this intervention. And I've only been to the site recently for the first time. So my question is, I was wondering if y'all have any advice on collecting data in a somewhat I guess chaotic community environment, lots of kids, not a lot of people on the research and practice team, supervise. I saw someone put in the chat, maybe you could chat with teachers. That's not really going to be an option. There aren't a lot of facilitators. So I guess being in a slightly under-resourced intervention environment, how can you still create like a data collection process that's, respectful and effective, and you can actually get some data that you can use?
Yeah, incredible questions, and very, very happy. I want to talk more as this continues, just with a very humble eye on the clock, and excited to learn more about what you're doing. Just I think off the top of my head, the first thought that comes to mind is the kind of practice or activity around drawing from like data parties and data walks as kind of like as a tool. Typically that's thought about from like a dissemination or interpretation lens. But it's also a really interesting way of thinking about the environment you're talking about and like needing to kind of gain people's attention pretty quickly and then engage. And so finding some ways to then kind of have quick snapshots of how people are interpreting, experiencing, and the possible outcomes that are resulting from the program that you're describing. And then also a potential opportunity here to be really clear about like what the primary outcomes of interest are, and to really lead with that based on how you're describing the data collection opportunity, while still trying to balance and keep a very open mind to, the other kind of insights that are going to be shared. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful and a little bit of a sneak peek of what I'd, again, be thrilled to have a longer conversation about after the webinar wraps.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And I'll also note really quickly, just based on the chat, this is helpful because that also can help inform how we set up our next webinar, seeing that there's interesting questions around collecting data, balancing privacy concerns, etc. So thanks to you all for highlighting that. All right, Dan, I think you're gonna close us out, or was that me? Yeah.
I'm happy to, with an assist, of course, if there's anything that I miss or I miss or forget here. So first and foremost, just thank you sincerely, everyone, for your time, your attention, your engagement and participation. I learned a lot just seeing the different interpretations and applications of the problem statement in a lot of different contexts. So what's next? So many things. So we'll send out the recording by email and then post it to our event page within the next couple of days. Please do continue to share the series with colleagues and your networks via LinkedIn, team meetings, Slack chats, however folks are sharing information these days is very much welcomed. We're excited to continue the series and continue to expand the conversation. There are a couple of resources that Shana is putting in the chat around DataKind's discovery worksheet and different tools. And then, of course, we invite people to engage with a free and publicly available self-paced DSI online course, which includes some great badges and a certificate of completion for working through what we consider and developed in partnership with our partners as the kind of foundations of community and equity-centered data practice and strategy. Other than that, we're happy to receive additional questions from folks via email or any reflections or comments in addition to the snap polls that Shana did earlier. Our emails are here, and we'd be thrilled to hear from folks, and then hope to see many of you, if not all of you, calendars depending, of course, back on October 28th for the next in our series. Shana, anything I missed? Anything you would add?
Mute. Sorry about that. No, thank you all so much. Please stay tuned for that email. We'll make sure to share all of that information with you. And feel free to reach out to us if you want to talk more in depth. Thank you, everyone, for your time.